The morning it finally broke open. Vera Callis stood at the edge of the county farmer's market with 47 bars of soap arranged on a pine plank table, and Doyle Prenter, who owned the largest dairy cooperative in the valley and had never once lowered his prices out of courtesy to anyone, was standing 6 feet away with his jaw working like a man chewing something he could not swallow. He had a ledger tucked under his arm. His face had gone the color of old brick. The soap on that table was wrapped in brown paper and twine, labeled in Vera's plain handwriting, and it had sold out by 9 in the morning every Saturday for the past 4 months. People had started arriving before dawn to hold a place in the queue. Doyle Prenter looked at that queue and then looked at Vera, and Vera looked back at him with the particular stillness of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a moment and is in no hurry now that it has arrived. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? 3 years earlier, the Valley had judged Vera Callis quietly, firmly, and with the particular confidence of people who believe that saying a thing loudly makes it true. They had decided she was finished. They had decided the 12 acres she refused to leave after her husband, Reuben, died were too rocky, too exposed, and too far from the road to amount to anything, and that a woman alone on a hillside with no livestock and no income was not a farmer, but a stubborn remnant of one. She had heard what they said because small valleys carry sound the way stone carries cold. She did not argue. She went home and looked at her land. That was the spring of the 2nd year after Reuben, which Vera counted not by calendar, but by the fact that she had, by then, stopped expecting to hear his boots on the porch steps. Grief has its own arithmetic, and hers ran in quiet columns she did not share. She was 41 years old. She had $212 in an account that was now only hers, a root cellar, a wood stove, and the 12 acres. She also had something harder to inventory, the specific, unshowy stubbornness of a woman who had grown up on marginal land and understood in her marrow that margin was not the same as worthless. It was the first week of April when the dairy's truck came down the back lane and stopped at her fence for the first time. The driver, a young man named Cole, who had the look of someone recently reprimanded, climbed down and explained, without meeting her eyes, that the dairy had a surplus of whey and skimmed milk left from a curdling run that had not met cooperative quality standards, and that rather than haul it back to the processing facility, Mr. Prenter had authorized disposal on the far side of the lane. There were 11 cans. The smell was sharp and fermented, more barnyard than kitchen, and the liquid inside was a thin, yellowish white that sloshed heavily against the lids. Vera looked at the cans. Then she looked at Cole, who was already retreating toward the truck. "He's paying to dump this," she said. It was not a question. Cole paused. "Hauling credit. Standard arrangement. Tell Mr. Carr." "Prenter, the credit isn't necessary," Vera said. "I'll take the cans." Cole looked at her the way people look at someone who has agreed to something they do not understand the cost of. He left all 11 cans without looking back. Here was the truth Doyle Prenter had counted on, that Vera Callis had no use for off-spec dairy waste and no way to process it, and that the arrangement was a small humiliation disguised as a convenience. He had been disposing of surplus this way for years along the back lane, always on land belonging to people quietly obligated to him, and the cans always sat and soured until someone buried the mess. He expected the same here. He expected embarrassment and eventual departure. What he did not account for was the woman who lived next door. Her name was Marta Voss. She was 73 years old. She had come to this valley from somewhere in Central Europe 40 years ago with her husband and a single case of books, and she had outlasted her husband 2 failed harvests and the opinion of everyone who had written her off as merely eccentric. She kept a kitchen garden that was preposterously productive for its size, and she had a way of watching the hills that suggested she was reading something written there that everyone else had forgotten how to see. Marta had been watching Vera since the funeral with the careful attention of someone who knows that the seed and the stone look identical in the first cold weeks of spring. She came over the afternoon. The cans arrived. Walking through the gap in the fence, she had long since stopped, pretending required permission, and she looked at the 11 cans and said in her clipped, lightly accented English, "You know what this is?" "Waste milk," Vera said. Marta shook her head. "Fat and acid and water. In the right hands." She pressed one finger against her lips. "My grandmother made soap from worse than this. Lye soap, glycerin soap. She made it from everything nobody else wanted." "I don't know how to make soap," Vera said. "No," said Marta, "but I do. Not a dramatic offer, not a ceremony. Just an old woman and a younger one, standing in thin April light, beside 11 cans of something most people would have dumped in a ditch, and the particular way one sentence can rearrange the future without raising its voice." What Marta said next was the thing Vera would carry for years, the thing she would hear on hard mornings when the arithmetic seemed to run against her. Marta said it in the matter-of-fact tone she used for observations she considered obvious. "A thing that has gone a little wrong has already survived something. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of character." The beginning of character. Vera set the phrase somewhere central inside herself. The way you set a tool you know you will reach for again and again. They began that same week. Marta produced from what seemed like thin air, but was in fact a very organized pantry, a lie. She had been processing from wood ash over the past 2 winters, 3 pine scrap molds, and a notebook in which her grandmother's recipes existed in a language Vera could not read, but Marta could recite from memory. The first batch used 4 gallons of the soured, skimmed milk, 2 pounds of rendered fat from Vera's root cellar and Marta's lye, and it produced, after 4 weeks of curing and upon first cutting, something Vera had not encountered before. Not bad, not good. Exactly warm and slightly sharp, with something almost floral underneath that had no right to be there. "That," said Marta, pointing at the smell, "is what people pay for and cannot name." Vera wrote down every measurement, the temperature of the milk, the time of day, the color of the fat, the exact weight of the lye. She understood instinctively that she was not yet making a product. She was making a record. A body of knowledge assembled from repetition and attention, which is the only way to make a body of knowledge worth anything. The second batch failed. The third separated. The fourth set correctly, but crumbled when cut. Vera did not despair at any of these failures. What she felt was the specific alertness of a person solving a problem that has not yet been solved, which is a different feeling from despair, the same way a locked door is different from a wall. After the 4th failure, Marta read aloud from her grandmother's notebook and translated in phrases. The phrase that mattered: "The acid content of the milk governs the saponification rate, and if you do not adjust the lye accordingly, the batch will not hold." The soured off-spec waste Prenta had dumped contained more lactic acid than fresh milk. Once Vera understood that, she understood she was not working around a defect, but with a precise and unusual raw material that required its own calibration. This was the hinge. The thing Doyle Prenta's quality standard had rejected was, in Vera's hands, a specific ingredient. His floor was her foundation. By the end of May, she had a consistent batch. By mid-June, she had 3. Each bar weighed 4 ounces, cured for 4 weeks on a pine plank rack in the root cellar where the temperature held at 54 degrees, and emerged smooth and slightly waxy, smelling of the warm, complicated thing Marta had named on the first cutting day. Vera tested the soap on her own hands, which after 2 years of grief work and hillside farming were dry and cracked. Within 2 weeks, They looked like someone else's hands, younger, easier. She showed them to Marta without a word, and Marta looked and said simply, "Now you know what you have." There was a girl named Blythe who had begun appearing at the fence line around the time the curing started. She was 8 years old, the granddaughter of a family 2 properties over, and she had the quality possessed by certain children of existing outside the social agreements of adults, arriving and departing by her own internal schedule without embarrassment. She had named the root cellar the cold room. She had named the pine rack the sleeping shelf. And one afternoon in late June, she picked up a cured bar, pressed it against her cheek, and announced, "It smells like the inside of good." Vera wrote that down, not as marketing language, though she would come to think of it as the truest description she had heard. She wrote it because Blythe had arrived at the same conclusion Marta had pointed toward, and the convergence of 2 sources with no reason to agree seemed like evidence worth recording. By July, she had 64 bars curing, and a question, what to do with them. She gave 12 to Marta. She gave 4 to Cole the next time the truck came, because the surplus arrangement had continued, and because Cole had begun arriving with a slightly different expression, less apologetic and more curious. Cole held the wrapped bars. "You made these from the milk," he said. "Among other things," Vera said. Cole was quiet a moment. "Then they're selling this kind at the cooperative store in town, the fancy kind. $4 a bar. 64 bars curing. The arithmetic ran clean. $256 if she sold all 64. More than her entire remaining bank account. From 11 cans of waste milk, 2 winters of wood ash lye, and a dead woman's recipe in an untranslatable notebook. Staggering. But Vera did not let herself be staggered. She let herself be interested. There is a difference, and the difference is survivable. She did not go to the cooperative store. She did not go to Doyle Prenter. She did not present the soap publicly for another 6 months, which the Valley would later read as strategy and which was simpler than that. The batches were not yet consistent enough to stake a reputation on. She had a strict internal standard for the difference between a thing that works and a thing that is ready, and she would not cross to the market side of that line until identical batches had run for 8 weeks in a row. By August, the dairy was sending the truck twice a week. Cole had begun timing the pickup from the processing facility more precisely, delivering at a stage of fermentation that was more consistent. He had not been asked to do this. He had simply been paying attention. She acknowledged this with a single nod. Cole acknowledged the nod with a single nod back. And between 2 people paying careful attention, that was enough. The work expanded. Vera reorganized her kitchen around the soap making. 1 corner for lye, 1 for fats and additives, 1 for temperature monitoring. She began adding ingredients from the hillside, which she had started to see differently. A ridge wild rose that bloomed in June, heavy and uncultivated. Calendula volunteers along the south fence. A clump of lavender that had survived 3 hard winters, ungardened and persistent, which Vera took as evidence for a principle she was developing. The things that survive without assistance are usually worth your closest attention. Each new additive was tested across 4 batches before it was considered established. Vera kept records in composition notebooks, 1 page per batch, date at the top, measurements down the left margin, observations on the right. By October, she had 4 notebooks. They were the only record of a soap-making methodology that existed nowhere else, built entirely from the intersection of Marta's inherited knowledge, Vera's precision, and the specific characteristics of Doyle Prenter's discarded waste. In October, the first cold came early. Vera winterized the curing space, insulating the root cellar with salvaged barn board, and she set 60 bars for the long winter cure. Marta had told her this was the version her grandmother made only once a year and saved for the hardest winter skin. 6 weeks minimum, 10 weeks, ideal. Vera chose 10. Blythe came by on Saturdays, even in the cold, coat buttoned to the chin, sitting on the counter stool and watching the combining process with focused, unblinking attention. One Saturday in November, she watched Vera add dried rose petals to the mold and said, "Why do you do the same thing the same way every time?" "To know what the thing costs," Vera said. "What does it cost?" Vera listed it aloud because Blythe's questions had a way of demanding honest answers. 4 gallons of soured milk at no purchase cost. A half-pound of lye from the ash barrel costing labour rather than money. 3 ounces of fat from root cellar stores, dried additives from her own land. Raw material cost per 64-bar batch, approximately $4.20 if she valued her own labor at 0, which she did not but had to for the floor calculation. Packaging, 11 cents per bar. Total material cost, roughly 15 cents per bar. Retail, comparable, $4. Margin, if she achieved that, $3.85 per bar. Across 64 bars, $246.40. Across 4 batches a month, nearly $1,000. More than the Valley thought Vera Callis capable of producing from 12 rocky acres and a pile of discarded dairy waste. She did not say the last part aloud. She kept it the way Marta had once described keeping a thing you know will be proven, like a coal under ash. Give it air too soon, and it goes out. Keep it too long, and it burns what you meant to save. The timing is everything. Blythe listened to the numbers with her round, serious eyes. Then she said, "You should charge more." Vera smiled, which she did not do carelessly. "Maybe," she said. It was December when the Valley's dairy trouble began, though no one connected it to the larger pattern until March. A fungal blight had been moving through the feed stores, traceable eventually to a single supplier who had distributed contaminated silage across 4 counties. In December, it appeared as isolated incidents, a herd here, a herd there, animals producing less, then producing badly, then in some cases not recovering. The cooperative farms that sourced exclusively through Prentice supply arrangements were the most exposed, because Prenta had locked them into consolidated feed purchasing 3 seasons ago, a deal that had seemed like efficiency and was now revealed as a single point of failure. By January 6, Valley farms were operating at less than half their normal yield. By February, the cooperative store was quietly rationing. By March, when the ground was still iron-cold, 5 farms had sent their herds to slaughter rather than carry the winter cost, and the Valley understood it was in crisis. Vera watched this from the hillside. She had no herd to lose. She had never purchased from the consolidated feed supply. She had been operating from radical self-sufficiency. She had not chosen as philosophy, but arrived at through necessity, and necessity, it turned out, was an excellent teacher of resilience. The dairy waste still came. The cans arrived. Vera worked. The soap cured in the cold room, batch after batch, patient and unhurried, growing in number against the day she had decided on in her own mind without announcing it to anyone. It was Marta who suggested the market, not the cooperative market, which was Prenta's arrangement and would require his approval. The county farmers' market, which ran Saturday mornings from April through October in the lot behind the granary, governed by a board that had maintained strict independence from the cooperative on the grounds that a market owned by one buyer is not a market at all. "April," Marta said in March, in the tone she used for things that were not suggestions. "April," Vera agreed. She had, by then, produced 240 standard bars across the winter cure, plus 80 of the rose variant, 60 calendula, and 40 of the long-cured winter batch held the full 10 weeks. When she unwrapped those last bars, they were the best soap she had ever held in her life. Dense, smooth, smelling of something she could not name, except by its effect, which was the feeling of being cared for. She priced the standard bars at $4.50, the rose and calendula at $5, and the long-cured winter bars at $7.50. Marta looked at the price list and said, "The winter bars should be $10. People will balk at 10, Vera said. People who balk at 10 are not the people who understand what 10 means, Marta said. Price is not about what people will pay. Price is about what the thing is worth. The pause that followed had the quality her silences always had, the sense of something large being condensed into a small vessel. My grandmother said, "The woman who undersells her best work is lying about its value." And a lie in the price is a lie to yourself. First, Vera raised the winter bars to $9.50, a compromise, and she knew it, and she made a note to raise them to 10 within 2 months if they sold, which she believed they would. She set up the table on the first Saturday of April with 47 bars, holding the rest in reserve, because she had learned from Marta's grandmother's translated wisdom and from her own months of observation that a managed scarcity is not dishonesty, but accuracy about the actual production cycle. The table was pine plank. The labeling was her own handwriting. A small card read, "Made on the Calais hillside from local dairy. 4 varieties. Ask about the winter cure." By 7 in the morning, there were 9 people at the table. By 8, there were more people than table. By 9, the 47 bars were gone. Vera had a list of 14 names who wanted to be contacted when the next batch was ready, and she had collected $211.50, which was within pennies of the exact amount that had been in her bank account on the morning the dairy cans arrived. She noticed this and did not consider it coincidence. She considered it the arithmetic of a thing working out the way arithmetic does when all the variables have been managed with sufficient care. She was repacking the empty pine table when Doyle Prenter appeared. He had been in the market that morning, as he was most Saturdays, and he had watched the queue from the far end of the lot with an expression he would not have named aloud. He approached with the walk of a man who has rehearsed an approach. "Vera," he said, with the warmth of someone who has decided warmth is strategically appropriate. "Quite a morning." "Yes," she said. "I didn't realize you'd gotten into the soap business." His voice carried the tone of a man asking a question he already knows the answer to, the knowing visible in the slight tightening at the corners of his eyes. He had been counting the transactions. He had watched 47 bars move across a pine table in under 2 hours. "It came together over the winter," Vera said, "using the dairy way, I suppose." He smiled. "We were happy to help you out with that arrangement." "You were disposing of waste," Vera said. "I was finding a use for it." He absorbed this. "Well, I think there might be a real opportunity here for both of us." He opened the ledger. "I could see incorporating a soap line into our cooperative table. Revenue share arrangement, say 60-40. In your favor," Vera said, "given the infrastructure, supply chain, table presence, cooperative marketing. It's standard." "The supply chain," Vera said, "is coal bringing cans down the back lane." The smile stayed on his face, but stopped moving. "We provide the raw material," he said. "You were disposing of it," Vera said again, patient, not loud. "You were paying to dispose of it." He closed the ledger. His voice shifted slightly, something beneath the warmth becoming audible. "I could revisit the cans arrangement. Supply is always subject to operational review." Vera looked at him. She had been here before, not with Prenter specifically, but with the concept he represented, the person who believes that controlling the input is the same as controlling the output, that a withdrawal of resources will produce collapse. She had learned, over 2 years on a hillside with nothing but rocky land and the stubbornness of a woman who had already lost the thing she could not replace, that resources are rarely as singular as the person withholding them believes. "I have relationships with 3 other regional dairies," she said. "2 of them have called me. They have the same surplus problem you have and have been trying to figure out what to do with it." This was true. Cole had mentioned it in passing, and Vera had made 2 calls the previous month. The other dairies were smaller, more desperate, and more willing. Prenter's face had begun to go the color of old brick. He looked at the empty table and the 14-name list folded into her pocket. and at Vera, who was standing in the April morning with the stillness of someone who has learned that quiet is a form of argument that cannot be interrupted. "You've been building this," he said, and in his voice now was less authority and more the sound of a man realizing he has been watching the wrong field. "The whole time I've been making soap," Vera said. He made another offer. The share dropped to 50-50, reframed as partnership, dressed in the language of mutual benefit and cooperative solidarity, and it was refused with the same quiet that had met the first. He referenced the valley's troubles, the feed blight, the farms in difficulty, and whether a local producer ought to consider her obligations to the community. Vera listened to this with the patience of someone familiar with the use of community as leverage. "Mr. Prenter," she said, and this was the longest speech she had made in the conversation. "The farms in trouble this winter lost their footing because they relied on a single arrangement that failed. What the valley needs is more arrangements, not fewer. I'm planning to offer supply relationships to 8 farms on the north side. For waste milk I can't yet process. I'll pay them a small collection fee. That's more income for struggling farms than a consolidated cooperative table would have given them." He looked at her. The ledger was tight under his arm. "You've been planning this," he said. "I've been paying attention," she said. His jaw worked. He made one more offer the way a man will when he has no more positions to retreat to. 40% in her favor, which meant he wanted to attach himself to something he had watched emerge from nothing and had taken no risk to build. Vera shook her head once. "I don't need a partner, but I'll sell you soap at wholesale. Same price I offer the cooperative store. $4 a bar standard, 6 for the long cure." She paused. That's fair. It was not the price she would have offered in other circumstances. It was the price she offered because it was, as she said, fair, and because she had understood from the very beginning, from the morning Cole had left 11 cans, and she had looked at what was in front of her, that the goal had never been to win something from Doyle. The goal had been to make something that had not existed before out of materials everyone else had decided were worth nothing. Winning was incidental to making. Fairness was not. He took the wholesale arrangement. He did not thank her. He walked back across the market lot with the walk of a man who has lost the thread of a story he thought he was telling. Vera folded the name list and put the empty table in the back of her truck. The weeks that followed had the quality of a season that knows what it is doing. Vera returned the second Saturday with 90 bars, and they sold in 4 hours. The third Saturday, she brought 112 bars and 3 helpers. Marta, who stood at the table with the authority of a woman whose opinion cannot be easily revised. Cole, who described his presence as curiosity, and which was obviously something more. Answering questions about the soap with the complete confidence of a child who has watched a thing be made from the beginning. The 8 Northside farms sent their first waste milk collections in May. Vera paid 12 cents per gallon collection fee, which was not large, but which was consistent and immediate, and which, for 3 farms operating on fumes since the feed blight, was the margin that allowed them to carry the season. By June, she had converted the root cellar fully into a curing facility with 60 feet of pine shelving, moved production into a partitioned barn section with better ventilation, and the composition notebooks now numbered 11. The methodology they contained was, as far as she could determine, unique. A soap made from high lactic acid dairy waste, calibrated for precise saponification at that acid content, with additives sourced from ungardened land-specific botanicals, cured at low stable temperatures for 4 to 10 weeks. It worked because the flaw in the raw material had been understood rather than discarded. A thing that has gone a little wrong has already survived something. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of character. By August, there was a standing order from a small hotel 40 miles east. By September, a dry goods shop in the county seat had placed an order. By October, when the market season ended, Vera sat at the kitchen table and did the annual arithmetic the way she did all arithmetic. Clean, without sentiment, each column honest. That first market year, beginning April and closing October, she had produced 4,080 bars across all varieties. Weighted average sale price, $5.80 per bar. Total revenue, $23,664. Raw material costs, including Northside collection fees, $1,112. Packaging, $449. Net, before she counted the hours, $22,103. The packaging figure she had arrived at by multiplying 11 cents per bar across the full production run, which came out close enough to that number to satisfy her. She sat with this number and felt something she identified after a moment as not pride, but recognition. The recognition of someone who had calculated a possibility in a root cellar with a child, listening and watched it prove out. Not right in the sense of winning an argument, though an argument had been settled, right in the sense of having seen something accurately that others had not, and having built from that seeing. She walked to Marta's and knocked and stood in the doorway while Marta poured tea without asking whether she wanted any, because Marta understood that being offered a thing before you express the want is one of the oldest forms of saying you are known. "The year is good," Vera said. "Tell me the number," Marta said. Vera told her. Marta set down the teapot and was quiet a moment, not the quiet of surprise, but the quiet of someone confirming what they had already measured would be true. "Next year," she said, "you double it. If I can scale the curing space," Vera said. "You can," Marta said. "Not encouragement, assessment." Marta did not offer encouragement as a separate thing from belief, because to her mind they were the same thing stated at different volumes. The second year brought the doubling Marta had predicted. It also brought the Valley's slow, not quite admitted, recalibration of the story it told about Vera Callis. The version that had settled into consensus 3 years ago, the stubborn remnant who would not leave the rocky 12 acres, the one who took waste milk from the dairy as though it were a gift and not a humiliation, that version was becoming harder to sustain. Not because people admitted they had been wrong, people rarely do in the neat way that would make moral instruction easy. What happened was quieter and more human. The version simply became less available. In its place, slowly, a different version assembled itself, one in which Vera Callis had always been known to be capable, had always been the kind of woman who would find something in what others threw away. Vera observed this revision without comment. The version people construct to protect themselves from the memory of their own misjudgment is a form of penance, even if they call it something else. The Northside Farms was stable by the second spring. 3 had expanded their collection arrangements and were now operating under 2-page agreements. Vera had drawn up herself, reviewed by a lawyer in town, at a cost of $120, which she considered the best $120 she had spent. The agreements guaranteed collection fees for 2-year terms, giving the farms a planning horizon they had not had, and giving Vera the supply consistency to commit to her hotel and dry goods accounts with confidence. Blythe turned 10 that year and had developed a specificity about the soap that was startling. She could identify batches by smell. She could estimate a bar's curing time within minutes. She had begun keeping her own small notebook, and once Vera read an entry that said simply, "The March batch smells colder than the April batch, even though the temperature is the same." Vera thought about this and concluded it was likely the cow's winter feed versus spring pasture affecting the milk's composition. She adjusted the lye ratio for the March batch accordingly. The next March batch was better, she told Blythe. Blythe received this with the serious nod of a colleague. Cole had, by the second autumn, left the dairy truck route and become Vera's dedicated collection driver, managing pickups from the Northside Farms and from Prentice facility. which still sent surplus through the back lane because the arrangement remained functional, and Prenter had not found a reason to end it that did not make him look worse than. Continuing, Cole was paid in cash weekly, at a rate he had negotiated in 2 sentences. He drove carefully. He timed the pickups. He was paid for the precision as well as the transport, and he knew it, and it made him precise. The second year's revenues came to $41,820, roughly the doubling Marta had named, with costs that had risen proportionally as Vera added 2 part-time production workers, and a net that she had stopped needing to keep under ash. The coal was burning openly. Now the warmth was visible from a distance. And so it was the 3rd spring market, the Saturday in April, that opened the scene with which this story began. The Doyle Prenter came with his ledger and his face the color of old brick. The 47 bars on the table were a curated first-of-season selection. The full inventory held back deliberately, the Pine Table's Saturday ritual, now one of the Valley's small ceremonies, the line before dawn, a fact no one questioned anymore. Prenter had brought his ledger because he had been tracking the wholesale orders. He knew the hotel account, he knew the dry goods account, and he had done the arithmetic as best he could from the outside. The figure he was carrying as his estimate of Vera's annual soap revenue was $47,000. He had arrived at it through a contact in the dry goods chain who had let slip a volume number and through market observation, and the figure was close to wrong in a direction that would have made him angrier if he had known the actual third-year number was higher, as the hotel and dry goods accounts had both expanded in the spring. He knew 47,000. He should not have known any number at all. That was the slip, the self-betrayal, the moment when his effort to track what he had claimed to dismiss proved he had never dismissed it. When Vera sold the last bar at 9 in the morning and Prenter stepped forward with the ledger, he said, "47,000 is a serious operation, Vera. You need a real partner now." She let the number land between them the way a coin lands on stone, with a ringing that does not stop immediately. He had said 47,000. Vera had not told him 47,000. The dry goods volume was a private term. The hotel account was private. "Mr. Prenter," she said, "how do you know 47,000? He held the ledger. His jaw moved. "You've been tracking my accounts," she said, not loudly, "through the supply chain." The people near the table were listening. They were not pretending not to. Cole was listening. Blythe was listening, with her eyes very still. Marta, who had been repacking a box at the end of the table, had gone as quiet as a woman who has been expecting a particular moment and recognizes it when it arrives. Prenter began a sentence about industry knowledge and cooperative overview, and Vera let him finish it, and when he had, she said the thing that ended the negotiation. "You told me when you first came to this table that you provided the raw material. I said you were disposing of waste. I want to say this plainly, in front of people who've heard both sides. I took 11 cans of soured milk your dairy had abandoned. Over 3 years, I have paid 8 farms in this valley a collection fee for waste they could not sell. I have employed 3 people. I have built the entire methodology myself at no cost to you or the cooperative, from a dead woman's notebook and my own records. The $47,000 you've been tracking doesn't have your name in it anywhere." She paused. "It has Cole's. It has Marta's. It has the Northside Farms. It has mine." The market lot was very quiet. "The wholesale offer stands," she said. "Fair price, same as before. I'll sell to anyone in this valley who wants to carry the soap at fair price, including you. At the same terms, I offer the dry goods store." She picked up the pine plank. "Aye, that's the arithmetic of it." Prenter stood with his ledger. The brick color in his face had concentrated. He was a man who had calculated losses before and knew the feeling. But this was a different calculation. The one that happens when you understand that what you treated as a disposal site was in fact a foundation, and that the woman you thought was a stubborn remnant was building steadily and without noise. He took the wholesale arrangement. He did not speak further about partnerships. He walked back across the market lot in the April morning, and Vera watched him go with the specific absence of triumph. That is what actual resolution feels like when you have been patient long enough for the resolution to mean more than the victory. Cole drove the first of the season's collections down from the Northside Farms that afternoon. Blythe rode along because she had asked and Cole had said yes, and she arrived at the barn in the early evening with her coat buttoned and a notebook under her arm, helping move cans into the kitchen staging area with the capable efficiency of a child who knows where everything belongs. Marta came for supper, as she did most evenings now, the gap in the fence, long since formalized as a path that went both directions. They ate at a kitchen table while the curing room held its quiet, and the April dark came in over the rocky 12 acres and the hills beyond. She said, Marta began, meaning her grandmother, meaning the dead woman whose notebook had started all of this, that the woman who learns to use what is thrown away will never be poor, because the world will always throw things away. She was right, Vera said. She was right about most things, Marta said, the small, dry smile. Except the men and the weather. Blythe was writing in her notebook. She did not look up. The lamp was on. The soap was curing in the cold room on the sleeping shelf. 40 feet of it, bar after bar of something built from a discard, patient and dense and smelling of the inside of good, banking its warmth in the dark the way a coal does, not burning fast or bright, but burning true and burning long. A thing that has gone a little wrong has already survived something. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of character. Vera had heard it first in April light beside 11 cans of waste. She heard it now in the weight of a bar in her hand and the sound of Blythe's pen moving and Marta's breathing across the table. She would hear it, she thought, in the particular way you hear a thing that has stopped being a sentence and become a fact for the rest of her working life and likely beyond. That was the arithmetic of it, finally, and finally, the arithmetic balanced, not to the penny, because nothing true balances to the penny, but to the place where what you put in and what comes back are each what they should be, and the accounts of a careful life, kept honestly and worked without noise, come out to something worth the keeping